Are you wearing your rubber boots tonight?
This is JD's podcast. JD's Rubber Boot Podcast. He's gonna sit and relax and tell you all sorts of stories. He's gonna tell you all about life and sports, and probably will play some games. And if nothing else, you know we're gonna have a laugh. This is the podcast.
Thank you, Lester McLean. Episode 3 of the podcast. It's actually a very special week here on the Rubber Boots podcast because you're going to get two episodes for the price of one. We were going to do, and what we've done the first couple of weeks is do our silly shenanigans with Puffy and Lester, and then in the second half of the podcast, we do an interview. And we may still do that. I'm still trying to figure this out, but Jay Baruchel is on this week. Goon 2 is coming out. He's the director and writer and star of Goon 2. I want to spend a lot of time with Jay. And our other special guest is Bob McKenzie this week. So we thought we'd give you 2 different podcasts. So Jay Baruchel coming later in the week, but Bob McKenzie today. But before we get to that, no Rubber Boots podcast is complete without Rod Smith's recap of last week's podcast.
Early on, James and producer Christoph stage one of the worst rap battles in the history of bad rap battles.
1, 2, 3 into the 4.
I put the pen to paper, put the paper to pen.
Neither one challenging the new king of rap, Jeopardy host Alex Trebek.
Panda, 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 panda.
Later on, Puffy reveals his key party guest preferences.
I tell my wife that Tom Brady's coming over for a key party. She's quickly on board.
On to the second half, where our guest, Jared Kiso, poetically describes the fine art of writing the hit show Letterkenny.
So yeah, that's basically my job is judging who's got the best words for taking a number 2.
He's talking about taking a poop. That's your episode 2 recap. Now back to Kiana's Flex Appeal.
Consult a physician before starting this or any exercise program.
Thank you, Kiana. If you can get Rod Smith to say poop on your podcast, I think that's enough for one episode.
That is pretty impressive.
We could say goodnight. Welcome, everybody, once again. Puffy is with me. Lester has been kicked off the podcast. We were tired of his ass, and so we fired him. No, not really. We have such a small room. You heard Lester off the top. You'll hear him. But we put Lester on tape today because we have an extra special guest, and that is the legend Bob McKenzie in the small, tiny podcast room today. Bob McKenzie, who, of course, is the creator, host of the Bobcast, which we tried to start a rivalry with, but then decided that we would get pummeled. So Puffy and I have stepped down and welcomed Bob onto our podcast.
Open arms.
Hello, Bob.
3 weeks in, is that where you are?
Yes.
3 weeks in, and you had to get the Bobby bump.
It's so true.
The Bobby ratings bump. It's true. It's actually...
So you're out, so let me get this straight.
Yes.
You're out of guests, basically, in the 3rd week.
Yes, essentially. We have booked...
It was a good run, though.
This is like off the record.
We've booked...
You'll be back for episode
Kate
4.
Burness.
Do I get a
for
keg
next
gift
week.
certificate like I used to?
It'll be in 2 weeks from now. It'll be my special guest today is Puffy.
You know him from earlier podcasts.
No, we did this. This is we should say if you're hopefully you're listening to this. Christoph will try to get this up quickly tonight. This is about 3:30. Oh, okay, almost 4:00 on the day before Trade Center. And so we thought it would be best to talk a little bit of Trade Center. We didn't talk much sports last week either, so I felt a little bit guilty. So we have Bob in here and Puffy, who's one of our producers on Trade Center, and we just thought we'd share some Trade Center stories with the guy who basically did you create Trade Center?
Well,
Bob?
Gord Miller likes to take credit for it because Gord's like that.
Yeah, he takes credit for everything.
But Gord and I together, we've talked about it, and then Gord said, see, because I didn't kiss ass management as much as Gord. Gord hung with the really powerful people, and Gord and I talked about, you know what, we should really just be obliged, just break trades and it was different back then, but and then Gord mentioned it one time to the bosses, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, good idea." So we, it evolved because initially we were always in to work it,
just doing little updates or something.
And like in the old days, TSN, what would they call it? Sports Desk. They would call it Sports Desk. They would do live updates every half hour, but there was all canned programming. I mean, it was like darts and whatever. lumberjack competitions.
Kiana's Flex Appeal.
Kiana's Flex Appeal. Rod Takes a Poop.
I'd watch that. I'd watch the hell out of that show.
But in any case, so we started, 1 year, I forget, Gord might remember better than me. I'm 60, I don't remember much. But I think we started like the show at 3 o'clock. And then we were like, well, if we're going to do it at 3, should probably started at like 2:30 or 2, and it just kept on going and going and going. And now I don't have to tell you when we're starting.
Well, I think I got on board at about 2003 or so, and that's when we started. I think it was the Moore Bertuzzi year that actually started it. And when Bertuzzi hit Moore, it was a late Vancouver game the night before trade deadline. And I remember my phone, I went to bed just before that happened to try and get some sleep, and Mark Milguer, our boss, called me at 3:30 in the morning and said, "You have to come in. Bertuzzi hit Moore. All hell's breaking loose." And I got to the studio and there was nobody there. There was one cameraman, Troy, and Billy Dotson, I think, our producer, and he said, "We're going on live now at like 5 a.m. And I said, "There's nobody here." And the cameraman the lighting guy wasn't even in. He had like a bash light pointing at me on my little perch on the desk, and I had no script or anything, so I was going to go on and do Trade Center by myself. And I talked them out of that, and then Healy came in. Glenn Healy used to be on our show, and me and Heels did, I think, the first hour and a half together. And
because I had done I was actually in the night before,
right?
And right through to like 2 a.m. or 2:30, I was working and covering that. But anyways, you know what? It's taken on a life of its own, and it's kind of silly, and yet it's something that I think Canadians like.
I forgot, before we go any further, Lester, because he wasn't going to be here and we wanted him to contribute, he wrote a little intro song for you that I didn't play in your intro, but I'll play halfway through. Here's the Bob podcast song.
Go ahead and clap, 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 but Bobby Mackey's gonna chat, 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 and tell you where it's at. From the hip, he's gonna shoot here on the Rubber Boots podcast.
There you go.
That was very nice. It's a good thing I liked it too, because I was going to say in advance that if I didn't like it, I was going to take Lester's guitar and give him the El Kabong.
Well, you do have a violent side, I think. I've never really seen it.
Actually, it's all bark, no bite.
We do all feel that you could snap at some point and kill somebody.
Well, and the good news is I heard on episode 1 that if I do, Puffy's disposing of the body and he's doing the time. So why wouldn't I?
You would bury the body in a shallow grave in the canyon, or you would do the prison time.
I'm not that big.
But you would do that.
For Bob, I would.
Exactly. So I know, and then you started the Free Agent Frenzy too, which
I definitely started.
I can still remember that email where you're like, "Hey guys, why don't we do a show on July 1st?" And my reaction to that was, "What the hell are you doing?" I think I picked up the phone and said, "What are you doing?"
Do you know why I did that? Because I have to be on July 1st anyways, and misery loves company. So I said, if I'm going to be here all day and all night on July 1, I want Jimmy here too.
Yeah, that was cruel, but you were right, because that's the show that actually matters. That Trade Center is Seinfeld. It's a show about nothing. The Free Agent Frenzy is where all the action happens now.
Right. And then that's an evolution because of the salary cap, the flat cap, a lot of issues that have made the trade deadline less than what it used to be. But, because the trade deadline used to be really something. And it still could, depending. If we ever get out of this, it's the flat cap that's doing it. It's not just the salary cap. We've had some good trade deadlines with the salary cap. The reason it's really bad this year is because for the second, almost third consecutive year, the cap's not really going up. Mm-hmm. And if it goes up, it's going up so marginally that's what's scaring people. And that and the expansion draft. I'll tell you what, when the season's over, it's going to be nuts. It's going to be bodies flying all over the place. It's going to be fun.
Well, it's funny. I was researching for this podcast. I do extensive research for all my podcasts. In order to research this podcast, I grabbed a copy of...
Wait a second. That means Puffy did some work.
I grabbed a copy of my book, The Guy on the Left, which is out in paperback in a couple of weeks. And there's a chapter on Trade Center in the book. Okay. And because I wanted to ask you the closest time you've gotten to being screwed on Trade Center, besides the Iginla thing that we can talk about in a second, because Wardo's back on Trade Center this year. But I remembered, was it the Vinny Domfus trade from Montreal to San Jose?
I've got a number of them. That was one of them. That was in the days when you'd have to look it up. I didn't do any research for this either, so don't worry. But it was when Vinny Domfus got traded from the Montreal Canadiens
San Jose
to the San Jose Sharks. So at that time, and I want to say that it happened like right before 3 o'clock, the deadline, or 2:30 or something. But in any case, all I remember is, and TSN's been in 3 different venues, our studios. First one was on Leslie Street in Toronto. Then we moved up to Shepherd, Victoria Park in Shepherd. And then we moved to where we are now in the CTV building at McCowan and 401. So we were in the second TSN building, and I can remember very clearly that there was this newsroom, and I was sitting there, and where Jim Van Horn, who was our Sports Center anchor at the time, or Sports Desk anchor at the time, he would do live updates right at the bottom of a staircase. And he was literally 5 feet away, like no further away than we are. Like the cameras were on him, but I was just off to his side, sitting at a little cubicle. And I was on the phone, and the person at the other end said, Domfus to San Jose. And the second he told me that, I could hear them counting Jim Van Horn down to an update. They're going 10, 9, a live update. And so they're like about 6 seconds. And I go, Jim, Vincent Domfus from Montreal to San Jose. And he looked at me and goes, really? And I said, yeah. And so literally in 4 seconds, he went live on the air. And so from the moment that I was told to the time that it actually appeared on television was probably the quickest we've ever broken a trade. It was literally 7 or 8 seconds.
I've heard numerous stories, whether it's talking to GMs or assistant GMs, where they've been on the line, they've made a trade, and they're still on the phone talking about the details of the trade. And the trade appears on the TSN screen. So you imagine if you're 2 general managers and you're sitting there going, yeah, okay, this guy for this guy. Okay, good stuff. All right, so anything else we could talk? What the hell? It's already up. But has anyone ever...
So on that one then, so then I go back to my call. Because I said to the person, hold on a second. And so I told Jim Van Horn, and the guy goes, Jesus Christ, I didn't want you to put it on the air yet. It was just completed seconds ago. So that was the one that it was like it had just been completed. I just happened to get the word of it, and we got it on the air in 7 seconds. So from the time people might have hung up on the deal, it was like 20 seconds, and it was out there. And the worst part was Vincent Domfus was on a plane from Montreal to Vancouver, I believe, or Edmonton. It was Edmonton, and one of the reporters who traveled with the team used to use one of those crazy airline phones. Remember, it cost about $300 to make a phone call.
Mom, I'm calling from the plane.
And he called back to his newsroom, and his newsroom told him that TSN just reported Domfus had been traded, so it spread like wildfire on the plane. The Montreal Canadiens were not happy campers at all.
And the plane landed, and
he turned around and went back. They held Domfus, and the plane turned around and took him back, and that was that.
I tried to get into the trade breaking business 1 year long before Aaron Ward joined us when he was a player, and I knew him fairly well, and he was traded from the Rangers to Boston for Paul Mara. And we were doing a panel, and I got the call, and I think Darren Pang was on the panel and said, Panger, you got to host this. And I crawled under the desk to take the call, and Wardo said, I've been traded to Boston for Paul Mara. And I said, okay. And I came back up and I said, we have a trade to tell you about. Aaron Ward has been traded to the Boston Bruins for Paul Mara. And then we went to a Dutchie update. And Dutchie, God love him, who has the best lines.
No filter.
But no filter whatsoever. And so Dutch comes up and says, Duff, how about that trade you broke? Where'd you get that from? And I said, I have my sources. And he goes, yeah, Aaron Ward on the phone.
Nothing like getting outed.
And then Ward was on the phone 5 minutes later going, what are you doing? They're all mad. The Rangers and the Boston are all mad at me. And
one of the worst ones I ever had, and I'm trying to remember, I don't remember the exact circumstance, but it's funny because it involves a TSN employee now. And I'm trying to remember whether it was the trade deadline or it was around free agency. But in any case, it was Craig Button. Craig Button was the general manager of the Calgary Flames. And I got wind of something that was happening, and I reported it as fact. Went on the air, put it up on tsn.ca. There was no Twitter back then. And so that's it. I announced the Calgary Flames are doing this. Get a phone call from Craig, and he's furious. He's like, what are you reporting? That's not done. That was being talked about, but it's not done. And I'm pissed off now, and I'm not going to do it. And so you're wrong. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm in trouble. So I hung up the phone, and I told whoever we were working with at the time, Gordon, everybody, I explained what happened. They go, what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know. And then I started thinking about, well, I'm going to have to put something out that says I was wrong. It's not going to happen now. And then I thought, no, wait a second here. I'm just going to let this one ride, baby. And what happens, obviously, is your competitors, they hear the news, so they do what we do when we get beat on a story. You call and try to get confirmation. And you love it when you call up and the guy says, nope, didn't happen. So now the other guys are going, oh, good. TSN screwed up. Bob McKenzie's an idiot. So now they're beating the drum like crazy, saying it's not happening. It's not happening. And I'm like, so everybody at TSN saying, well, we better correct ourselves. I said, no, not until I know for sure that it's not going down. And in fact, it was like almost the next morning.
Wow.
The deal went through.
So those are some painful hours.
So that was incredibly bad, and I thought I really screwed up, and we have screwed up at times. But it's also a case where if you do screw up, sometimes you got to. If there's a chance that maybe the screw up might get reversed, you got to ride that one out.
I had one of those. We were at the draft in Ottawa, and it wasn't a big deal, but Atlanta had hired John Anderson as their coach, and I happened to be at a drinking establishment with a certain person who told me about this deal, and I trusted him that it happened. And so instead of contacting you guys, which I usually do if I ever do get something, I don't know, I'd had a few pops, so I just tweeted it. John Anderson's the new coach of the Atlanta Thrashers. And of course, you guys were on to me. Then there was this massive denial from all the Thrashers reporters, the Thrashers themselves, and everything. And I remember getting calls from you and Drake's going, Jimmy, you sure about this one? And I'm in the bar going, I think I'm sure.
He seemed pretty legit.
I go back to the guy and I'm like, we're right on this, right? And he goes, oh yeah, we're right. And sure enough, the next day they announced it, but that was not a good night for me either. And so you go through that all the time.
You always,
I'm sure.
if you think you screwed up, sometimes you just got to wait and you didn't actually screw up.
Now, feel free to check your phone because this is prime time for you.
I'm checking. It doesn't seem to be anything.
If stuff happens, you can walk out, and Puffy and I will just share stories because Puffy's involved in TradeCentres too.
Puffy's a big part of TradeCentres.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say a big part.
What do you do now? Like you used to, basically Puffy a few years ago, he used to just write down all the trades and bring them to me.
And then we realized that I could probably use a computer for that.
Literally, Puffy would handwrite 100 cards a day.
Games played. 47.
Yeah, so we've got a fine-tuned system now.
I don't think Puffy likes trade deadline day because normally in Studio 6 where we hang out, it's just us and Puffy.
Puffy pretty much rules.
Puffy pretty much runs the whole thing. But on trade deadline, it's like there's a gazillion people come in. There's all these outsiders. They come in. All the suits come down.
Yeah,
it's like a circus. You feel like you're in the zoo.
It's ludicrous. There's 100 people in that studio.
There are. And Puffy loses his standing, I think, a little bit. I think it's eroded.
I don't like it at all. That and the other free agent frenzy, I don't like that day either.
No. You want to own the studio.
Yeah, I like it when it's just me.
What else? Oh, another one of my favorites was I try to, unlike you guys who are on your phone the whole time, I don't have time to go on my phone because I'm just talking the entire freaking time. And so I pick up my phone one year. I think it was the lockout, the second lockout year. The year Berkey'd been fired by the Leafs, so that was the second lockout. And I started to get these texts from a number that I didn't recognize. And the first one was, "This show sucks." And it was followed by, this is the worst deadline ever. And then there was like a string of Z's. Zzz. And then that interview was gutless. And the next one was, "Why isn't Gino hosting this joke of a show?" And it went on and on. I obviously thought it was one of my buddies just having fun with me. But once about the 26 texts that came, they were coming every 5 minutes. I said, "Okay, Uncle, who is this?" And the next text that comes in goes, "It's Berkey. Do you miss me?" So that's the danger of Brian Burke being unemployed on trade deadline day. Those are always my favorite parts when you get to do the Berkey interview and the ties around the neck. And he just looks like he's been busting balls for the last 6 hours trying to get something done.
And he's going to do something to try and humiliate you.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Do you hate this day, or have you sort of accepted it as
more
reality?
or less. No, you know what? It is what it is, and I feel worse. I feel worse for you guys because you guys actually have to fill the time and be entertaining. Like we sit at that back panel, myself, Gord, Pierre Lebrun, Darren Dreger, and which, by the way, Gord every year at the end of it he says, "That's it. That's my last year doing this." See, because Gord, people don't realize this. Gord's a great play-by-play man. I think I'd rather listen to Gordon Ray than almost anybody do a game play-by-play in color. But Gord used to be a real news guy. Gord hosted That's Hockey. Gord was a SportsCenter reporter. Gord's reporting, he's one of the best reporters and insiders that you could possibly imagine. But as he did more play-by-play, he'd drift further and further away from it. But he's still very good, and he keeps things on the rail for all the insider chipmunks as we do our thing. But we just sit back there, and it's like, I always liken it to, it's fishing. I mean, we're just putting our line in the water, and sometimes they're biting, and sometimes they're not. But when you're fishing, you just keep putting their line back in the water, try a different lure, but just keep on doing it. And so, and what they like to do is they come, every so often they'll say, "Okay, we're going to go to the trade breakers." Billy says, "Go on to the trade breakers. Let's go to the trade breakers."
Billy's our producer.
And then we're like, "Don't come to the trade breakers. We got nothing." And they're like, "We got to come to the trade breakers." I'm going, "F off. We're not coming. We don't have anything. We're trying to get something. Leave us alone." So we basically tell them to screw off, and that means you guys have to do more talking. And then when you guys are in the middle of something that's really entertaining, if we get like Sven Butenschon trade, we're yelling, "We got to trade. Get it over here." And they can't get it over to us fast enough. So, but it's a grind. But
It's lunacy is what it is. It's the craziest show on television because any of these deals, with the exception of the odd day where you get a blockbuster, or if Matt Duchene gets traded tomorrow, fine. And even the Shattenkirk deal is a big deal. But for the most part, any of those trades that happen on TradeCentre, if they happened any time of year, they might not even make it into SportsCenter. They might get 10 seconds on SportsCenter. It would be nothing.
Absolutely.
But when it happens on that day, it's massive. And it's insane that we're on there for 10 hours. And but it's turned on me a little bit to where now I kind of have accepted it as this quirkiness of Canada and this kind of bizarre celebration of the crazy idiots we are and how much we love hockey, because people do call in sick and they do watch this show. And I think they know now that not much is going to happen, but they watch anyway. And part of it, I think, is that you're all sick freaks, and it's like rubbernecking at an accident scene, is that you want to see how we fill, and you want to see us scramble to fill all that time.
And you want to see us be wrong. That's probably the biggest thing, is just the fear. Because the ground rules change a little bit on this day, if they do for everybody and anybody who says they don't. But you got to be accurate. You got to be right, and it's a day that lends itself to potentially being wrong. And I mean, because things change. Reporting trades and this sort of thing was never meant to be done in real time. Or a contract negotiation, for example. You were never supposed to report contract negotiations or trade talks in real time. Because the minute you say, this trade's close to happening, two teams can say, screw it, we're not going to do it. You just pissed me off. You won't throw that guy in, we're not doing it now, and it's off. And then 30 seconds after you said, this trade looks like it's happening, somebody got pissed off and said, we're not doing it, and now it's off. And you have to say, okay, now it's off. And people look at you and say, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing my job, because the nature of media now and social media is that you do have to do play-by-play of trades and signing.
I fully believe that GMs do partially, they do their deals in advance because it's a safer way to do it. And I think that has changed. And if I was to look for a TSN Turning Point copyright, and this is totally out of the blue from me, but in my mind, when Ryan Smith was traded from the Oilers to the Islanders 10 years ago, that was a trade where he didn't want it to happen. The Oilers didn't really want it to happen, and everybody waited till the deadline, and it was a pressure deal that nobody was happy with. And to me, I feel like everybody after that said, I am never going to put myself in that situation again. And so if I have a big one to do, I'm going to do it a week before or 3 days before, and I'm never going to wait till that last day. And I think that's almost gone to an extension now where even the minor deals, they'd rather have them done so they wake up the morning of trade deadline and say, my business is done. I'm just going to sit back and watch these guys twiddle their thumbs.
Yeah, and I think you're definitely seeing that this year, like where because there weren't as many marquee names and there's not as much to do, that there's no need. It's not like there's a crazy auction going on for every player. So I think that's absolutely happened in this situation.
We want to get to Puffy's hypotheticals quickly before we go, but should we tell the Iginla trade? Because I don't know if we've ever...
Hey guys, here Iginla got traded to Boston. Confirmed.
So Wardo's back on TradeCentre this year. If you're listening to this after TradeCentre, you saw it. And that was a tough night, frankly, for TSN. But the circumstances were so crazy. We were doing a game the night before. Well, it wasn't the night before TradeCentre, I should say. It was probably 2 or 3 nights before trade deadline. And Bob was on the panel, Dregs was in studio, and Wardo was on the panel. And Wardo had all sorts of sources in Boston. And there was buzz all day that Jarome Iginla was going to be traded to the Boston Bruins. And we got into a tough spot. We had no confirmation. Bobby didn't have any confirmation. Dregs didn't have confirmation. But we were on the air live, and Wardo took a phone call. And you can say what was going through your mind, because that's fair.
Absolutely. So I see Wardo, he ran off the set, and I see him on his phone, and I can see he's very excited. And
we are talking. We are doing an intermission of a game.
Yeah, we're actually on in the intermission, and I can see he's pretty wound up, and rightfully so, because, he had like multiple sources saying Iginla to Boston is done. The Bruins are preparing for a news conference. It's, but anyways, so he's you can tell he's wound up, and he's coming back to the set, and I'm talking, and as I'm talking in the camera about something else, I'm kind of looking over, and I can see Wardo talking to James, and they're kind of motioning back and forth and whispering, and James is like,
I'm saying, are you sure? And he's going, yeah, I'm ready. I said, are you sure? I'm ready. You wanted to stop it.
So I'm sitting at the end, and I'm looking at Wardo, and I'm thinking chances are he's probably right about this. We've been hearing a lot of the same things, and he probably got the confirmation that it's good. But just as he was about ready to start talking, I almost said to him, you know what, Wardo, we're going to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we'll have some breaking news. And I should have done it, and I didn't. And it actually reminded me of Warren Beatty with the envelope the other night.
There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
This is not a joke. I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
Because he had that same look on his face that I had on my face. He's looking at the card, which in this case the card was Wardo, and he's looking off stage like, help! Is there some? Are we sure about this? Should we say this?
La La Land,
and then La La Land, and so God bless Wardo. He's a good man, and he does a fantastic job. He's one of for an ex-player to be as good at what he does in terms of breaking trades. And as I said, I've made lots of mistakes. We've all made lots of mistakes.
But in fact, he was right in many ways.
Right.
Like 99.9% of the time, because what we learned afterwards was that they had traded Jarome Iginla to Boston. Those GMs got off the phone and said, this trade is done, and
Jarome kiboshed it.
Yeah, and Jay Feaster said, okay, I just got to call Jarome to get approval, but it was done, and the Boston people were all saying, we got a deal. And this was the one case where Jarome kiboshed it at the last second. But that afterwards, I cannot describe how awful that studio was, because Bob, you've made your reputation as never being wrong, which you never are.
Well, I sometimes am.
Dregs is the same way, and as the minutes went by, and we did not know right away that it hadn't happened. There was just no confirmation for 15 minutes, and then a half an hour, and then an hour.
See, other people, though, same story. Just like I said before. So you've reported that. So it's out there. So now other networks, other people are calling and looking for a confirmation. And now all of a sudden, they're not getting a confirmation. In fact, they're saying, no, it's not done. And so they're reporting that. And so we were talking and huddling and saying, okay, so what do we do here? do we put out a correction right now? I said, no, just let it ride. You never know. He might change his mind and he might go back, and we still might be proven right before the night is out. So let's just in for a dime, in for a dollar. Let's double down on being wrong. And then once we realized that it definitely wasn't going to happen, then the next quest became, okay, we've got to make sure that when this trade does happen later tonight, as we anticipate, we better goddamn break it.
Right.
And even if it's the right one. And fortunately, we were able to come back and say, I was able to come back and say, Jarome Iginla to the Pittsburgh Penguins, done, confirmed.
Yeah, I remember when you guys got that call, whether it was you or Dregs who first got the call, and Pittsburgh, and my heart kind of dropped, but at least we did get it. We don't want to make this too long, so let's get to our regular segment.
Buffy's hypotheticals are messing with my mind. Buffy's hypotheticals, what's it gonna be this time? Buffy's hypotheticals are blowing my mind again. Buffy's hypotheticals.
Puffy's Hypotheticals. Bob, I don't know if you know this segment, but you play it every night because Puffy does this in the studio every single night. He gives a strange scenario and you have to give an answer for it. Puffy, go ahead.
Usually in the studio, though, it's what would you do for $1 million? And your guys usually say, our jobs. And I say, I do 18 months in prison.
That is relatively accurate. Go ahead, Puffy. What do you have today?
Okay, so Bob, you're a big music guy. If you could attend one concert, past or present, who would it be in the concert venue?
Oh, boy.
So like the Beatles, 1966 Liverpool, something like that.
Yeah, you know what? You hit on a good one. Maybe the Beatles at Shea Stadium. And was that the first part of Beatlemania in North America? That might be a cool one. I could do this and say it's not a hypothetical and go back. If I could go back to September 4th, maybe 5th, 1971, Maple Leaf Gardens, my first concert ever. Led Zeppelin, Maple Leaf Gardens.
That's pretty impressive. I was just going to go the Hip this summer in Toronto, last Toronto show, because I got to sit next to Bobby Mack and we bonded.
Yes, we did.
That last one in Kingston would have been good too.
Yes.
I already said my Milli Vanilli, Puffy, and Young MC concert. It's tough to top that one. I've never been. I wasn't into the whole Zeppelin and all that kind of stuff, so that's a difficult one for me to say.
You can tell from this Rubber Boots podcast the name, because anybody that would go see Led Zeppelin wouldn't have a podcast called Rubber Boots.
Live Aid was a big deal because I was about 15 when that happened in 1985. That felt like the biggest concert ever.
I think that would be the one I'd want.
Okay, next one, Puffy. Or do you have an answer for that question, Puffy? You're allowed to answer questions.
You know what, though? I've got one more thing I want to say. On my bucket list, and it's never going to happen now because his voice is shot, AC/DC. I never saw them live.
That's a shame.
I saw them at the SARS concert, and they were amazing.
Sean and Mike, my two sons, were at the SARS concert.
They blew away the Stones.
That's right.
Wow.
Okay, so the trade deadline's a very stressful time.
Yes, it is.
If you could get away with one free sucker bomb, would you take advantage of it? And how much would you pay for a second?
Is this on a...
So you can punch like a GM who's like screwing you around, someone you work with.
Fellow insider?
Yeah, fellow insider.
Host.
Anything, a host. If you could throw one, like... The stress gets high, and you could just you're not going to hurt the person.
A quiz master.
I can't answer this question. What if the caterer is bad?
The caterer. No one takes more abuse than the poor caterers.
I would say that it would be the caterer for Bob, and because the caterer for trade deadline is usually like a few bags of chips and some 4-day-old bagels. Correct.
This
Bob?
year, I've heard it's going to be good.
No, I'm a pacifist now. I don't lose my temper anymore. I don't actually.
Okay, but this is the same guy who told me for years that I may retire by killing a man on the air or something, and that's the way I'll retire.
Well, that would be you. So
right, that's a good point. Do we have any more, Puffy?
No, that's good.
Okay, we wanted to. The one thing I've been doing. Our first few podcasts were really long, and I have a buddy named Steve Pratt who runs a podcast company, and he knows this stuff, and he told me maybe I should shorten it down a little bit. So that's why that we've broken it up this week. Bob McKenzie, thank you so much for joining us here. Good luck with TradeCentres. Most of the people who will be listening to this probably after TradeCentres, so let's hope we survive the debacle that it was.
I hope I'm not too tired to do the Bobcast on Friday, but I'll get it done in my own unique way, just sitting at home in my pajamas, me and Mull's on the line, and then I'm heading off to Florida for the GM's meetings in Boca. So
right. So
Mail It In March is upon us almost.
A reminder, Mail It In March is the best, as to be followed by Mail It In April, May, right through to October, essentially. Listen to the Bobcast, folks. It's fantastic, but only do after you've listened to the Rubber Boots podcast. Lester has a special TradeCentres song to play us out. It's kind of melancholy. Stay tuned a few days from now. Jay Baruchel, Goon 2, writer, director, star, all sorts of great stuff on the movie, his movie career, and hockey. He loves the Habs as well. Lester, ballad.
Not much going on today. The cupboard is bare. Holy Shattenkirk, what we gonna talk about for 10 hours? If Duffy starts to cry, you'll know why. 'Cause the cupboard is bare.
Guests of James Duthie's Rubber Boots podcast receive a $10 off coupon at Young Chow's Chinese Food in Blackburn Hamlet, Ontario. Young Chow's. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's the first place I drank underage. Thanks for listening.
Are you wearing your rubber boots tonight?